Sequoia's made one of its biggest defense bets on drone startup Neros. The company just closed a $250 million round, tripling its valuation to $2.5 billion as it looks to ramp up production of its attack drones. Neros CEO Soren Monroe-Anderson and Sequoia partner Shaun Maguire join us here in San Francisco. I think, they're big numbers. Congratulations on the round.
They're big numbers, but he deserves them.
They're big numbers. People focus on the valuation tripling, right? But I think it's a really interesting idea to be specific about Neros, what you're working on, what the specific technical challenges you're trying to overcome in your lane.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us. For us, this round is really interesting because we are going from being a single product, single capability company with the Archer strike drones into multiple products. So recently, we started publicly talking about Bandit, which is the counter-UAS interceptor that we are developing. And today, we're also announcing Archer AI, which is the first time one of our drones is going to have autonomous capabilities on board. So this is something that we've been really thinking about intentionally as a company. How do we become multi-threaded, multi-product? And we want to have as big of an impact as possible for the warfighter, and the way to do that is delivering more capability.
Away from the specific technology, there's also the ambition to ramp up output, essentially, through the end of the year. I guess that is partly where the capital comes in.
Yeah, and we've been focused on ramping production for a long time. Really, since we started the company, we knew we had to be very forward on production and supply chain. But this year, we've seen a big growth there. So today, we're at about 50,000 drones per year output. And by the end of the year, we'll be at 100,000 drones per year run rate. And we're looking forward. We think that getting the company to 1 million drones per year capacity is extremely important for having a strategic impact for America and our allies. So that's really what we've focused our factory that we moved into a few months ago. We call Millennium One. We've focused it around this goal of getting to 1 million drones per year vertically integrated.
Shaun, come in here. You led Sequoia's investment into SpaceX, and at that time, the initial investment, but present day as well, right? You would say SpaceX is a company one of one, an asset one of one. In the drone field, there are other proxies you can make your evaluation against. So how did you do that with Neros this time around?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair question, and a couple of things. One, I think there's a gap right now. There's probably about 5 of these next-generation defense tech companies that have actually done useful things in the field. Like it's about 5. It's not
would you
more
say
than
Anduril, Shield AI, etc.?
Yeah, I would say like, definitely Anduril. But Neros is one of the companies at the top of the list. Like what they've done is pretty striking. So that's kind of point one. Point two on this question. Like SpaceX, when they started with the Falcon 1 initially, that wasn't yet, a just massive leading rocket company. They were just getting started. And then with Falcon 9, it was still not as good as some of the state-of-the-art rockets from the past. But it was really, over the last 5-6 years where just through reusability, through production, through cadence, SpaceX just became, it's 90% roughly of the world's mass to orbit last year. For Neros, the way I think about where these guys are, it reminds me a lot of where the cellular communications industry was in the 90s.
Interesting.
If you think about what is an FPV drone, this may sound crazy, but it's actually it's basically a flying cell phone.
Yes.
So the most important thing is comms, where you don't want, you need very advanced radios that don't get jammed, et cetera. You need a bunch of sensors, cameras, infrared cameras, other sensing payloads. And you need to be able to do this kind of in a way where you're doubling your performance every year or so to kind of outpace all the defensive capabilities. And so like the actual body of the drones are more or less commodities, like the motors, the carbon fiber chassis, all this. But the payload, you're basically flying an iPhone that is on an exponential race. It's like a Moore's Law development pace. So if you go back to the 90s, there were a lot of companies that were basically buying the same components and making cell phones, but it ended up with Apple as the dominant player, and then Android as an operating system that went on other hardware. But I think it's going to be the same thing with drones. Like, these guys are building a whole product ecosystem where there's an operating system that lets everything happen seamlessly across drones and to accomplish a mission. And the development is in this it's very similar form factor as a cell phone. It's going to be very hard for people to compete.
Distinction or the core competency is software, what you would say? Or
I would say it's, and I'll let you go in 1 second, it's radios, it's
RF.
Sensors, it's integration of the electronics in a way that is scalable and reliable and is on an exponential trajectory, the same way making a cell phone is, plus the operating system to integrate with their other products, plus being able to manufacture insane numbers of units with a very reliable supply chain.
That's key.
Yeah, I think Shaun hit the nail on the head. And historically, we've been more hardware focused than software focused. What we really wanted to solve off the bat was the manufacturing of these drones without a Chinese supply chain. When we started the company 3 years ago, there was no way you could go and buy an FPV drone that did not use Chinese components, Chinese chips. And so that was really our core focus over the last 3 years, was building up this ecosystem of radios, flight computers, all these other things that are critical going inside of the drone, and being able to actually manufacture them at scale. Now that we've established a strong baseline there, we are pushing more on the software aspect with the autonomous capability that we're adding, as well as using that same component ecosystem from Archer into Bandit, our new platform. So we really think there's this flywheel where you build up this amazing base of components, and it allows you to go build other types of platforms very quickly.
You said it yourself. 3 years ago, you founded this company. To date, you have what you describe as major contracts with the Army, Marine Corps, contracts with every component of SOCOM, and other allied countries. Give us the backstory of how you were able to do that in that period of time.
Yeah, we've had to move really fast. We saw 3 years ago, our primary focus when we started was just in Ukraine, working alongside the Ukrainians, building a better drone for them. And at that point, the Pentagon did not really care about what we were doing.
From a procurement perspective,
they didn't really think that small drones had a massive impact for the U.S. warfighter. We had this bet that they would be, and that the Pentagon would realize that. And I think we've had a really interesting front row seat to watching that realization happen over the last 18 months and being well positioned to start delivering on real contracts as America has said, hey, we actually need drones. We need drone dominance. And so that has been, because we focused very heavily on building a useful product in Ukraine off the bat and then scaling the production, I think we've shown that we are really one of the only drone companies in America that can scale very quickly and actually deliver when these big contracts are coming down the pipe.
Soren's too humble. Can I just add?
Please, jump in.
So Soren is a young man. He was, many people don't know this, but there's professional drone racing leagues. There's 2 of them. He was the world champion in one of them and professional in the other. So starting as a young kid, he was just obsessed with drones.
That's the technology story, your background story.
And then kind of when the war in Ukraine started, he's very patriotic for the West in general, like for America, for Ukraine, for the entire West. And as a young guy, very early 20s, maybe even 19 at the time, basically flew to Ukraine and just started trying to help the Ukrainians, like learn how to fly drones and push the limits of their technologies. That led to, really getting the company going. And he's just been delivering everything he said he's going to do, he's done. And so it's just led to a big gap between Neros and most of the other competitors.
Shaun, can I ask you a slightly more difficult question about the future, because you don't have a crystal ball, but this is about reindustrialization for that specific vertical, the national interest of this country or the West. Those contracts we've discussed are with the public sector, essentially. So how do you model for that TAM in the future? You are an investor, first and foremost. How do you have a sense of how real and big the opportunity is?
Good question. So I think about it in 2 ways. Way number one is I've been very lucky to see SpaceX up close and then follow Tesla. And by seeing how SpaceX operates, which to me is the most vertically integrated company in the world, and I feel pretty confident in that statement, my vision is that there should be 10 companies like SpaceX in America, and that is how we reindustrialize. And what that means is that you start by selling one thing where you you buy a lot of your components from other people, and you over time vertically integrate your supply chain more and more and more. And then once you have this vertically integrated supply chain, like SpaceX is now the biggest. They make PCBs. They're the #1 producer of PCBs in North America for Starlink user terminals. That's trained a lot of other people in how to make PCBs that we had lost the skill in the West.
That's a supply chain ripple effect.
Yeah, it's a whole supply chain ripple effect. And so the people that learn how to, make steel alloys, et cetera, like they go and kind of do other things. And so SpaceX has done it in space, Tesla's doing it in automotive. I think if we had 10 companies that became national champions in some vertical, roughly 10, it almost doesn't even matter what they are, that will fully reindustrialize America. And so I think Neros, by being at the beginning of this exponential trend of drones and warfare, they're just getting pulled along, and they're able to compete even with China. And granted, China's vastly far ahead right now in drones, but they're close enough that they can actually compete. And my forecast is 10 years from now, people are going to be shocked by how vertically integrated this company is.
So that also raises questions of economics, right? You talked about establishing the supply chain. You've raised a pretty sizable round. Is it just purely dependent on scale in order that you give the value proposition to your customers, the different arms of the defense apparatus of this nation? Or is it still a technology advantage that you think will win out in the end?
I think it has to be a good combination of both. We've seen that today we can deliver a drone that is highly capable, that when our drone was certified for usage by the Department of War, it was about an order of magnitude cheaper than anything else. So we've already been able to massively reduce the cost of using small drones for the Department of War. We see that over time, what scale is really going to get us and what investment into the space is going to get us is actually closing the gap on some of these critical technologies. So Shaun mentioned radios as an example. This is one of the areas where Chinese drones are incredibly good. They iterate radios extremely quickly, and DJI, which is the world leader in drones, has built custom silicon around their radio stack, and they have by far the most performant radio stack in the world. And so we think that the investment that is going into the defense space, and really what Neros wants to do, is take that volume and take that capital and put it towards these foundational technologies that will allow us to actually close or even get ahead of where China is at today in consumer drones.
We just have 2 minutes left in the show, which is unfortunate, but I want to get to the backstory of Bandit, the new interceptor drone. This was catalyzed by a specific event of the war in Iran. Could you just pick it up, both of you, and why you moved so quick?
Yeah, I mean, we had been watching the development of interceptor drones in Ukraine for the last year and a half, and it's something that we knew was going to be on our roadmap, but we've tried to be very focused as a company because we do not want to get distracted and build too many things at once in lower quality. And so we really had to pick the right point to go and build Bandit, our interceptor. But when events started happening in the Middle East, we saw that American assets were getting targeted by Iranian drones, and we just did not have a reasonable defense for that.
This is interceptor. It literally intercepts other drones.
Other drones. So it goes after Shahed-style drones and takes them out of the sky. And this is the most economical way to defend against these types of drones. And so when we saw U.S. service members' lives in danger in the Middle East because of those threats, we knew we needed to act quickly.
Shaun, your 60-second assessment of how they moved quickly, their execution on that.
I think this is something that a lot of software investors get wrong about hardware companies. For software companies, when you have one successful product, it doesn't give you much of an advantage for building a new product. In hardware, when you have one successful product, the probability of having another successful product is very, very high. So you get to reuse a lot of the same components. You get to, you already have the supply chain. You already have the electrical engineers, et cetera. And so these interceptor drones, there's actually probably 80% or so overlap in the actual componentry and know-how. And so it's just, I think this will be the second, but not the last product these guys make.
Again, it's a big but early round. I'm sure you'll be back on the program in future raises. I appreciate you both taking the time. Soren Monroe-Anderson, Neros CEO, and Shaun Maguire, partner at Sequoia.